The invention of the motorcycle late in the 19th century was speed-driven. People wanted to go places faster than they could on a bicycle, so they strapped an engine on a bike, a simple concept. Today's motorbike is much more complex, and it leaves the earlier versions in the dust. These motorbikes are an engineering feat. They start by welding the frame out of lightweight aluminum, an advantage for speed and fuel efficiency. The frames are cleaned, powder painted, then baked to cure the paint. They fit a crankshaft and pistons into the engine's left block. They tighten the bearings and caps, then slide in a U-shaped tool called a fork that orients the pistons in an upright position. They compress the piston rings with another tool so that the pistons easily slide into place as they install the other half of the engine block. They place a gasket on the top of the block and then install the cylinder head. Using torque-controlled electric tools, they tighten the bolts to attach the cylinder head to the block assembly. They install the camshaft in the cylinder head unit. The camshaft will drive the valves that bring in air and fuel and let out the exhaust. They rotate the crankshaft to fine-tune its action. Now it's time to give this engine a little test run. They fill the engine with coolant and fuel, then run through the gears. They check for leaks and overall function. When it passes inspection, they purge the coolant from the engine. A motorbike engine isn't only about function. It also has to look good because it won't be totally hidden under a hood. Now, they lower the 102-kilogram engine onto a cradle that sits on a conveyor. They mount the frame onto it. They attach the rear wheel assembly, and then the front wheel. They attach the handlebar using torque-controlled tools. And they tighten the brake assemblies. Next, they fill the radiator with antifreeze. Meanwhile, over in the paint department, robots are hard at work. They attach the painted pieces to the bike. First the saddlebag body, then the lid, and finally the trunk body. Then they assemble the instrumentation. The speedometer, fuel gauges, and many other things all go onto one unit. This part is called the front cowl, and it goes right in front of the instrumentation. They lower the front cowl with the meter panel onto the bike. And then they bolt everything to the frame. Finally, they install a cover for the exhaust pipe. They check everything to make sure it's solidly put together. And then they pull up to a dynamometer, a machine that measures mechanical power. They check the bike's speed, brakes, horn, navigation system, and the cruise control. Every motorbike undergoes this scrutiny, and if it passes, it's ready for life on the road. They're called mini GPs, pint-sized motorcycles whose design is identical to that of the full-size motorbikes that race on the Grand Prix circuit. Mini GP motorcycles are designed for kids 9 to 12 years old who aspire to one day race the big bikes. A mini GP can reach speeds of 130 kilometers per hour. Its chassis is made of steel tubing to which they mount the handlebars along with the clutch and brake levers. At both the front and back of the chassis, they attach a fork. Then between each fork and the chassis, they mount a shock absorber. With a steel pin, they mount a wheel on each fork. The black circle at the center is a brake disc. Next, they install a brake caliper on each wheel. When the rider applies the brakes, the caliper grabs the brake disc, immobilizing the wheel. Now, mechanics begin assembling the engine block. Using a special tool, they install bearings that enable the gear shafts to turn. The engine has 6 gears, each of which is comprised of several steel gears. These go into the gearbox. Next comes the gear shifter. It connects the gears to the gear pedal that the rider operates with his foot. Next, they install the crankshaft. The combustion cycle rotates the crankshaft, which turns the gears. They close up that side of the engine, then assemble and install the desmodromic spring. When the rider selects a gear, this spring keeps it locked in position until the rider switches gears. The engine turns a drive shaft that, via this pinion gear, moves a chain that turns the rear wheel. On the other side of the engine, they assemble the primary couple and the various components that go into the clutch, such as clutch plates and the springs that stop and start clutch movement. When combustion drives the piston up and down, it rotates the crankshaft. The primary couple transmits power to the gearbox and clutch. This is a one-cylinder engine. They install the piston that drives the crankshaft, then mount the cylinder over the piston. They close up the cylinder with a cylinder head, then mount the spark plug that ignites the fuel mixture, driving the piston up and down. A head cover closes everything up. Next, they install the ignition. It consists of 2 magnets called a rotor and a stator. When the rotor turns, it generates an electrical charge that sets off the spark plug. Time to install the finished engine. They mount it to the chassis with support pins, front and back. Next, they install the water pump that prevents the engine from overheating, along with the belt that drives the pump. Then they mount the carburetor. It mixes the fuel entering the engine with just the right amount of air. Next, they install the air filter. It keeps out debris that would clog the engine. Now the exhaust pipe, the fuel tank, the seat, and the fairing, a plastic enclosure that shields the driver. The final component is the chain connecting the drive shaft to the rear wheel. The engine turns the shaft, which turns this chain, which rotates the rear wheel. Mini GPs come in different sizes. This particular model has a 50cc 14 horsepower engine. Pretty impressive for a kid's motorcycle.